Hello, everybody. It's me, Fee, White Zulu, and welcome to another reading from my autobiography of the same name. I hope you're enjoying them. I'm getting lovely feedback from many of you, and I do appreciate them enormously. And I left you, um, I'd actually finally reached Standard 7, third form, and it was, no, fourth form. And we had the privileges of sleeping in an unsupervised annex where, of course, we got food smuggled in and the rats took it. Big surprise there. And this is chapter 43 of my book, White Zulu, and it's called Andy, Rest in Peace, 1965. My friends had now begun to show an interest in boys. I only knew one boy. His name was Andy, and he was Delia, my younger sister's age, 3.5 years younger than I was at 15. But my friend. His parents were friends of Mum and Dad's and lived in Johannesburg. His mother often came to stay on the farm and brought Andy with her. He hero worshipped me as I was such a tomboy, and he was anything but. Slightly plump with puppy fat, he loved cooking, playing light classical music on the piano, and hair and flower arranging. I was extremely fond of Andy. He gave me a wonderful, unconditioning and adoring friendship, something I'd never had before. He was the brother I'd never had, and although he was too terrified of horses to ride with me, he would walk or run, red-faced and puffing, beside me when I went for a ride. He was as faithful to me as my beloved dog Pitts, and they were sort of similar in a way, totally unsuited to their surroundings. They would both put themselves through anything to be with me. The year after I went to college, Andy went to Michael House, the brother school to St. Anne's, and he wrote me long and amusing letters about school. He was miserable at boarding school as well, and I'm sure he was bullied unmercifully, something that I hadn't suffered. But he didn't complain, and I loved getting the nice big fat envelopes from BG, Balgowan, the nickname for the school, as it was situated in the Balgowan district of the Dargle, and quite close to our farm, with his handwriting on them. I wrote back to him just as prolifically in prep. I'd write him long letters in my jotter, leaving out the dear Andy bit so that any nosy prefects who cruised the classroom looking for trouble. It looked like I was writing an essay. Naturally, we were forbidden to write personal letters during prep. So I'd tear the pages out later and address the envelope to him. The fact that I was receiving lots of letters from a Michael House boy didn't go unnoticed by my friends. And there was another ritual which brought me more and the most surprising attention. It was the tradition at St. Anne's near Valentine's Day for the prefects in charge of our post to confiscate anything which arrived by mail, for them to sort out something which might look like a Valentine's card. These were then held back until the 14th of February, on which day the head girl stood on the steps of the courtyard and, accompanied by catcalls and shrieks and whistles from the rest of us, called out the names of all the girls who'd received Valentine's cards. To my amazement, I became the girl from fourth form to receive the most Valentine cards in the school. This was simply because my birthday was at the end of January, and people like aunts, godparents, and relations overseas sent my cards to the school. These were collected up as Valentine cards and withheld until the much looked forward to distribution. Andy added to this astonishing pile of cards by sending me lots of real, proper, and enormous Valentine's cards with a Michael House postal stamp on them, nogal. So I had to traipse up and down the courtyard as each card was mockingly held up high by the head prefect. My name was called out again and again, and I had to run the gauntlets of whoops and cheers. Some years I got about 15 cards, when other older girls received no more than one or two, and some none. A couple of memorable occasions when Andy's mum took him home to their magnificent and opulent home in Rosebank in Joburg. She took me up to stay with him as company for Andy. I was his only friend, and I had the most wonderful time. His parents owned huge grounds, which included a big swimming pool and tennis court, all right in the centre of one of the most upmarket suburbs in Johannesburg. He had a brother about 5 years older than him, but totally different. He was well over 6 feet tall, very good looking, well built, and captain of the rugby team at the same school, Michael House. Mostly, Andy's brother and parents ignored us, but I was used to that, so I didn't mind, and sat there happily in their sunny study or library on the thick pile carpet reading their National Geographic magazines, my absolute favourite. While Andy cooked up a delicious, extraordinary selection of well-presented gourmet dishes like salmon mousse with transparently thin slices of cucumber for the scales and half a stuffed pimento green olive for the eye. Or I sat with him at his baby grand piano while he serenaded me with tunes from musicals, particularly my favourite called The Shadow of Your Smile, also known as the love theme from The Sandpiper, and other show tunes he'd learned to play. Music was Andy's first love. He had lessons and played with precision and passion. Now and again his mum would drive us in her Jag to Hillbrow or Rosebank and drop us off to have dinner at a smart restaurant there, and then to a movie afterwards. I enjoyed this glittering lifestyle, so different from that on the farm, and Andy and I, aged 13 and 15 respectively, often dined at the top of the President Hotel in a revolving restaurant while we were waited on by Indians in long white aprons, and a live band played in the corner. We went to see films like The Sound of Music when it came out first, And Andy cried when the old nun sang Climb Every Mountain, but I didn't. Continued this deep friendship for the next 10 years until, tragically, while Andy was at UCT, he took his own life, aged 23. Back at school, I had to decide which subjects I had to take for matric. None of them looked particularly inviting, so I looked at them from another angle. I would have taken art, but I showed no talent whatsoever. I had to drop maths anyway because I still couldn't count past 10 and still can't. And I dropped Latin so that I could do French. I would so much have liked to do Latin and French because Latin is the basics of all the Spanish, Italian, and other Latin-based or Latino languages. But no, it was one or the other. But I chose French. I chose 3 languages as they were so easy. I looked at geography because I quite liked the subject from reading all those National Geographic magazines, and it looked as though all I needed to do was draw a few maps and mountains. So I chose that. That left history, which I knew I could waffle through, and one other. So I chose domestic science, as it looked like a bit of cooking, and we could eat what we made, and how hard could that be? The domestic science block was next to the SAN and consisted of a big room full of stoves with a locked pantry off one side. The first thing we learnt was how to pick the lock on the pantry door with a hairpin, the same way we'd learnt how to get into the sacristy next to the chapel and drink the communion wine kept in there. We ate all the raisins and drank the cooking sherry. Our textbooks were so out of date that the illustrations showed girls wearing mob caps and long dresses preparing the food. The subject hadn't changed much since the Voortrekker days, and some of the skills we had to learn for matric were how to make a water filter with all the big stones at the bottom and the fine sand at the top, how to make our own soap using caustic soda and glycerine, and invalid cookery, which involved rennet, the stuff from a calf's stomach, which thickened the disgusting milk puddings we had to present to those unfortunate and vulnerable invalids, along with beef broth. The invalid dish we had to make was poached white fish in parsley sauce. And I excelled myself by finally chopping a small green caterpillar into the parsley, which I'd obviously forgotten to wash, and then having hysterics because I've been terrified of caterpillars all my life, ever since one sunny afternoon on the farm, when a young male cousin of ours pulled back my T-shirt and stuck a large handful of those prickly, grey, hairy, venomous caterpillars which sting down my back. I had been badly stung as they released their little hairs with the venom in them into my skin, and I couldn't get them out. When I discovered that the chopped green parsley wasn't all parsley but partly caterpillar, I collapsed with a lot of shrieking of genuine horror and had to be sent out of the building to calm myself down and get the inevitable punishment. I still can't bear to look at caterpillars, even on TV. I've got to close my eyes. Nor can I look at worms, my other worst thing of all. I'll handle snakes, spiders, you name it, but don't show me a worm or a caterpillar. I go into the horrors, the grolls. Domestic science also involved sewing, something I'd never ever done in my life, and, aged 15, was told I had to make a pair of shorty pyjamas. I was given the pattern and told to choose some material. There was an ugly pond slime green gingham check cotton there, and I chose it out of sheer indifference. I then cut the pattern out all wrong, tacked the paper to the material, and cut that out wrong as well. I never got past the tacking. The teacher, a young woman who'd taken an instant dislike to me on sight, never even looked at my work. She'd walk past my desk without turning her head and say, "Ross, tack that again. It's all wrong." I had no idea what was wrong, and she didn't show me, so I never got past that tacking stage. While other girls in my class made padded ottomans in upholstery class, I picked moodily at my piece of green gingham and never got anywhere. Cooking wasn't a great success either, and I made the odd lopsided half-burnt and half-raw sponge cakes. But somehow I passed all my subjects and scraped through my exams with D's and the odd E, but never enough F's to actually fail and stay down, or abandon that subject, as both my older sisters had done. When our reports came, just after we'd broken up for the holidays, and I heard Mum shouting for me, I called the dogs and took to the hills where the baboons slept, where I stayed until dusk and slunk back home, hoping Mum would have calmed down slightly from her rage at reading words like insolent and lazy on my school reports. Could do better was about the highest praise I ever got from my exasperated teachers. I tried to point out that my sisters had been allowed to drop out of school, and Delia didn't have a hope in hell of getting her matric, as she was struggling far more than any of us had. And did Mum get a matric? She took off at this question, evaded the answer, and went on and on about how bright I was and how I did no work at all. I was to stay on and write matric, and that was that. That's all for today. I want to thank John Moslane so much for putting aside his Fridays to do this with me. And I want to thank Sean van Vuren, who puts up these videos and does such an extraordinary job so well for me. And if you want any more photos and other information on the books I've written, please go to my website at www.whitezulu.com. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you're enjoying these, and goodbye till the next time.